The rain had been falling since dawn, soft and constant, wrapping Portland in a gray hush. Laura Dawson sat by the window of her small apartment, watching droplets chase each other down the glass. Her wedding dress hung on the closet door, a shimmer of ivory in the dim light. Yet she felt no thrill, no flutter of excitement, just a quiet heaviness pressing against her chest. She had tried to ignore it for weeks. Ryan Holt, her fiancé, was everything people said she should want. Stable, respected, successful. He owned a hardware store on the east side and always knew the right things to say when others were listening. "You're lucky," her colleagues told her. "Men like him don't stay single long." Maybe that was why she had said yes so quickly, out of reason, not feeling. When her mother's health began to decline a few weeks ago, Laura told herself it was just fatigue, nothing serious. But the phone calls from Maplewood had grown shorter. Her mother's voice thinner. Agnes Dawson had never been one to complain, even after her husband died. Still, something in that last call, a faint tremor, a pause before she said goodbye, had unsettled Laura deeply. So that morning, she gathered her courage. As Ryan scrolled through messages at their kitchen table, she said quietly, "I've been thinking maybe we could postpone the wedding a little. Just a few months. I want to spend some time in Maplewood with Mom." The click of his phone stopping was the only sound. Ryan looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. "Postpone?" "Yes," she said, her hands tightening around her coffee mug. "She hasn't been well, and You're already sending her money every month," he interrupted. "She's fine, Laura. You don't need to run off every time she sneezes." "She's alone," Laura replied, trying to keep her voice calm. "It's not about the money." Ryan leaned back, crossing his arms. "You know what I think. You're looking for an excuse. You're scared to move forward, and you're using your mother as a reason." The words stung more than she expected. "That's not fair," she whispered. He sighed, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Look, I get it. You grew up in that little town with people who think owning a gas station makes them royalty. But you live here now. You have a future. Don't throw it away because of small-town nostalgia." Laura stared at him. "Maplewood isn't just nostalgia. It's home." Ryan laughed softly. "Home? That place is dying. The smart ones all left. Like you did." He reached for her hand, but she pulled back. "Hey," he said more gently, "I'm just being honest. You don't need to go backward." Her chest tightened. There it was, the subtle arrogance she'd been trying not to see. The way he talked about others, about her roots. Like they were something dirty she should have washed off years ago. "I'm not ashamed of where I came from," she said quietly. He tilted his head, the smile vanishing. "Maybe you should be." The silence that followed was heavy. Rain tapped against the windows like the steady ticking of a clock, counting the seconds until everything broke. Laura rose from the table, her voice trembling but steady enough. "I think I'll go for a walk." Ryan didn't stop her. He only muttered, "Do what you want, but don't make a scene. We're supposed to be meeting the planner at 5. Outside, the rain met her face like cold glass. She walked aimlessly through the narrow streets of her neighborhood, past the bookstore where they'd first met, past the coffee shop that smelled of cinnamon and damp coats. Every memory of him now felt like a photograph left too long in the sun, faded, unreal, somewhere between the wet sidewalks and the low hum of passing cars. Laura admitted what she had been afraid to say aloud. She didn't trust Ryan, not anymore. And love, whatever it was supposed to feel like, had quietly left the room weeks ago, replaced by something colder. As she turned the corner toward her apartment, she glanced at the cloudy sky and whispered to herself, almost like a promise, "I need to see Mom." That was how it began, not with a fight or betrayal, but with rain, silence, and a quiet decision that would change everything. That evening, the city had quieted under the drizzle. Streetlights cast long amber reflections across the wet asphalt outside Laura's window. She sat curled up on the couch, a blanket around her shoulders, her phone face down beside an untouched mug of tea. The silence after the argument with Ryan still hung in the air, thick, uneasy, and louder than words. When the phone finally buzzed, she almost ignored it. But the name flashing on the screen pulled her back 20 years in an instant. Chloe Mitchell. Laura hesitated before answering. Chloe? Wow, it's been, what, a decade? 11 years. Chloe's voice rang bright and confident, like the sound of laughter that never learned to age. I saw your engagement photos online. Miss Perfect finally found her prince. Laura laughed softly. Something like that. Oh, please, Chloe teased. If you sound that thrilled, I'm worried already. Then her tone shifted, warm and familiar. Listen, I didn't call to gossip. I heard your mom's been under the weather. Laura straightened. You heard. Small towns talk, remember? My aunt still lives out there in Maplewood. She mentioned your mom stopped working at the clinic months ago. She's resting. She says she's fine, Laura replied, though the words felt hollow even as she said them. Then let's find out for ourselves, Chloe said. Let's surprise her. You, me, road trip. I'll drive. You can sleep the whole way. Laura blinked, caught off guard. Tomorrow? Chloe, I can't just. Ryan will. Ryan will survive. Chloe cut in. You don't know your fiancé. A daily report. You're visiting your mother. Not eloping with me. Laura smiled despite herself. That was Chloe, bold, a little reckless, never asking for permission. Back in high school, she was the girl who got detention for skipping class to protest cafeteria prices, yet somehow ended up class president. She always had that fearless energy that made Laura feel both safe and slightly breathless when near her. I don't know, Laura said finally. He hates surprises. And Maplewood's hours away. Then it's perfect. Chloe interrupted again, her tone bright with mischief. A surprise should be inconvenient. Come on, Dawson. You've turned into the most responsible woman I know. But when's the last time you did something just because it felt right? Laura looked at the rain outside, the pale reflections flickering like ghostly headlights. It's been a while. Then it settled. I'll pick you up at dawn. Pack light. Warm coat, no wedding stress. No guilt trips. Just two old friends, one long drive, and your mom's favorite daughter showing up at her door. Laura laughed. She loves you more than me. You know that. Of course she does. I bring good wine and fewer disappointments. The joke landed softly, but behind it lingered warmth, a reminder of friendship that had once been effortless. Laura found herself nodding, even though Chloe couldn't see her. All right, she said, her voice quiet but certain. Tomorrow morning. 6 a.m., Chloe replied. Coffee on me. And Dawson. Yes. Don't tell Ryan. Let this one thing be yours. The call ended, leaving Laura in the stillness again, but it wasn't the same silence. It carried something lighter now, almost like hope. She glanced at the dress hanging in her closet, its ivory folds too pristine, too final. Then at the packed weekend bag she'd never unpacked after her last school field trip. She set it on the bed and began folding a few clothes, her movements slow but deliberate. Outside, the rain softened to a mist. Somewhere beyond the dark skyline, Maplewood waited, her childhood home, her mother, the scent of cedar and wet earth she hadn't breathed in years. Laura didn't know that by this time tomorrow, she wouldn't just be returning home. She'd be stepping straight into the truth, one that had been waiting for her all along. The next morning, dawn broke pale and cold over Portland. The city was still half asleep when a white Range Rover pulled up outside Laura's apartment. Chloe leaned on the horn twice, cheerful and impatient, a paper cup of coffee in one hand and sunglasses perched on her head despite the clouded sky. Morning, sunshine, she called as Laura stepped out. pulling her coat tighter against the chill. "You said 6, Laura said with a small laugh. "It's 5:40. "Early bird gets the highway before traffic," Chloe grinned. "And don't worry, I brought enough caffeine to wake the dead." Laura slid into the passenger seat, greeted by the scent of leather, vanilla air freshener, and the faintest trace of Chloe's perfume, the kind that always made her seem like she belonged on a magazine cover. As the car glided onto I-5, Portland's skyline faded behind them, replaced by endless stretches of fir trees heavy with mist. For a while, they drove in companionable silence, the tires humming against the wet pavement. Laura watched the fog curling through the forest like breath. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed this kind of quiet, the way the Pacific Northwest carried peace even in its grayness. "So," Chloe said eventually, glancing sideways, "tell me about Mr. Perfect." Laura smiled faintly. "Ryan's not perfect. He's driven. That's code for control freak." "Chloe," she said with a sigh, "he's just under pressure. The business, Chloe's tone was playful, but sharp. "You've always made excuses for people, even when they don't deserve them." Laura looked out the window. Raindrops streaked the glass like silver threads. "He's not a bad person," she said quietly. "Maybe not. But something's off. I can hear it in your voice." Laura didn't answer. The truth of it sat between them unspoken. After a long stretch of silence, Chloe spoke again, her voice lighter. "You know, I could run a quick background check on him. My friend Leo works in cybersecurity. He owes me a favor." Laura turned sharply. "A background check? That's insane, Chloe. He's my fiancé, not a criminal." "You'd be surprised how often those overlap," Chloe murmured, smirking. "Relax. It's just a standard lookup. Public records. Nothing illegal." "It's still invasive." "Is it?" Chloe kept her eyes on the road. "Or is it just protection? You wouldn't buy a house without an inspection, would you?" Laura frowned, unsure how to respond. The comparison was absurd, and yet a tiny part of her couldn't shake the memory of Ryan's face yesterday, that cold detachment when she'd mentioned visiting her mother. "I don't know," she admitted. "It feels wrong." "Then don't think of it as digging dirt," Chloe said softly. "Think of it as peace of mind." The car filled with the sound of rain again. Laura didn't agree, but she didn't say no either. That small silence between protest and permission was all Chloe needed. They passed through long stretches of road where the trees arched overhead like a cathedral of green and gray. Somewhere near Salem, Chloe put on soft music, old acoustic songs they used to listen to in college. It brought back memories Laura hadn't visited in years. Nights studying in dorm rooms that smelled like coffee and rain. The feeling of belonging to a world still unwritten. Her mind drifted further back to Maplewood, her childhood home, where the scent of pine and apple pie lived in the walls. And then, inevitably, to Evan Brooks. She could still see him as he was at 17, tall, broad-shouldered, with that lopsided grin that made her blush. They'd spent summers by the river, talking about everything and nothing, until the day she'd seen him kiss another girl, her friend no less, and something inside her had broken. She'd left town the next morning without saying goodbye. Now, 2 decades later, she wondered if she had ever really stopped thinking about him. "Earth to Laura," Chloe said with a grin. "You're a million miles away." "Just remembering," Laura murmured. "Maplewood does that," Chloe replied. "Don't worry, we'll be there by dinner." Laura nodded, watching the fog thicken ahead. Somewhere beyond it waited her mother, her past, and a truth she didn't yet know she was driving toward. The motel smelled faintly of old coffee and rain-soaked carpet. Morning light filtered through thin curtains, gray and cold, painting the room in dull silver. Laura stirred under the blanket, still half asleep, when she heard Chloe's voice, soft, but tense in a way that made her eyes snap open. Laura, Chloe whispered. Wake up. You need to see this. Laura blinked, confused. What time is it? 7. I couldn't sleep. Chloe was sitting cross-legged on the edge of her bed, her laptop glowing in the dim room. Her face was pale, her usual playful spark replaced by something grim. Laura sat up slowly, heart tightening. What's wrong? Chloe hesitated before turning the screen toward her. It's Ryan. Laura froze. What about him? I told you I'd have Leo run that check, Chloe said carefully. He sent me the results at dawn. And Laura, there's something you need to know before you see this. Laura felt her stomach drop. Chloe, what did you do? Just look, Chloe said quietly. On the screen was a folder labeled Ryan Holt Background, and beneath it a series of files, court documents, police reports, business records. The first line that caught Laura's, I made her go still. Domestic Violence Report, 2018. She scrolled down, hands trembling. Photos, statements, names blurred together in a haze of disbelief. His ex-girlfriend had filed multiple complaints, bruises, hospital visits, neighbors hearing shouting. Each report ended the same way. Case dismissed due to lack of evidence. The next document was worse. State of Oregon versus Ryan Holt pending investigation. Fraud, embezzlement, falsified invoices through his hardware store. Allegations of unpaid wages to employees. The kind of thing she had only seen on news headlines, never something that could belong to the man she was supposed to marry. Laura stared at the screen, her mouth dry. No, this can't be real. He told me his ex was unstable, that she tried to ruin his reputation. Chloe's eyes softened. That's what they all say. Laura pressed her palms against her face, breathing unevenly. How did I not see it? He was so calm, so controlled. Because people like him are good at pretending, Chloe said. They make you feel safe until you stop noticing the red flags. Then they start pulling the strings. Laura shook her head, tears slipping between her fingers. I thought he was just proud or maybe hurt. I thought if I tried harder, if I loved him more, hey. Chloe moved closer, wrapping an arm around her. Stop. You don't fix people like that. You survive them. The words hit her harder than the files ever could. Laura leaned into her friend's shoulder, sobbing quietly. The world outside was still and muffled. The sound of distant cars on wet pavement barely audible through the walls. After a long moment, Chloe said softly, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done it without asking. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And now, well, better now than after you sign a marriage license. Laura wiped her eyes. You saved me, she whispered. Chloe smiled faintly. No, you saved yourself the moment you said yes to this trip. Laura exhaled shakily, staring at the gray light creeping across the wall. I don't even know who he is anymore. Maybe you never did, Chloe said. But that's okay. You know now. Laura nodded, her tears finally slowing. She reached out, closing the laptop gently, as if shutting a door on a version of her life that no longer existed. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the hollow quiet that comes after an explosion, when the dust still hangs but the damage is done. Outside, the rain had stopped. A faint mist rolled across the parking lot, soft and eerie. Laura walked to the window, watching droplets slide down the glass. For the first time in months, she wasn't afraid, just empty and strangely awake. Behind her, Chloe's voice broke the stillness. You know, she said gently, truth doesn't destroy love. It just shows whether it was real. Laura turned, meeting her friend's eyes. Then I guess it never was. And in that cold, quiet motel room, something inside her broke, but it was the kind of breaking that let the light in. By late afternoon, the highway narrowed into a winding two-lane road, the kind that twisted through pine forests and low fog like a ribbon of wet silver. Chloe hummed along to the soft music on the radio, one hand on the steering wheel, the other nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The tension from that morning had thinned a little, though silence still lingered between them like the mist outside. Laura stared out the window, watching the rain blur the world into shades of gray and green. Her thoughts drifted toward the file she'd seen, toward the man she'd almost married. The betrayal was still raw, but what stung most wasn't anger. It was shame. Shame for not seeing it sooner, for believing someone who had looked her in the eye and lied. "You're quiet," Chloe said softly. "Want me to put on something louder? Maybe Taylor Swift, classic heartbreak therapy." Laura smiled faintly. "No, I like this. It's peaceful." Chloe glanced at her, then back at the road. "You know," she began, "I was thinking about something your mom said to me once. Years ago. She told me you had someone back in Maplewood before college. A guy who swore he'd wait for you." Laura's heart gave a small jolt. "Evan Brooks." "That's the one," Chloe said with a grin. "Tall, quiet, built like a lumberjack." Laura laughed softly, the sound tinged with nostalgia. "He was the kindest person I'd ever known. My first everything, really. We were just kids, but he made me feel safe." "So what happened?" Laura hesitated, eyes fixed on the fog ahead. "I caught him kissing another girl. My friend, actually. I didn't ask questions. I just left the next morning for Portland." "Did he ever explain?" "I never gave him the chance," Laura said quietly. "I didn't want to hear excuses. I thought leaving meant I was strong, that I was choosing myself." Chloe nodded slowly. "And instead, you built walls so high you couldn't tell the difference between strong and alone." Laura looked at her friend and gave a tired smile. "Something like that." For a while, neither of them spoke. The trees blurred past, their trunks dark and wet, the air thick with the scent of pine and rain. Finally, Chloe said, I think there's a difference between safe and true. Safe keeps you from getting hurt. True heals you after you do." Laura let the word sink in. "Maybe I've been chasing the wrong kind." "Maybe," Chloe said. "Or maybe you just needed to see the truth first." The road began to dip, revealing a valley below Maplewood, tucked between the hills like a secret. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the faint glow of porch lights flickered through the fog. It looked exactly as Laura remembered, quiet, steady, untouched by time. As the Range Rover slowed near a wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Maplewood Population 3102," Chloe eased her foot off the gas. "We're here," she said softly. Laura's throat tightened. "God, it's been so long." "Let's keep the surprise," Chloe said. "No headlights, no text. We'll park outside the old community hall and walk the rest. It'll be more dramatic." Laura laughed through the lump in her throat. "You just want to make an entrance." "Always," Chloe replied with a wink. They pulled over near the quiet dirt road that led toward Agnes Dawson's house. The air outside was cold, damp, and smelled of cedar. As they stepped out, the crunch of gravel beneath their boots echoed softly in the distance. "Ready?" Chloe asked. Laura looked toward the faint glow of her mother's house, half hidden behind the trees. "Ready," she whispered. Neither of them knew that the surprise waiting inside that little wooden home would change everything they thought they knew about truth, about love, and about the past that never really let go. The evening fog had grown thicker, curling low over the ground as they made their way down the gravel path. The air smelled of wet earth and pine needles, the kind of scent that instantly brought Laura back to childhood summers, barefoot mornings, the sound of her mother's laughter through open windows. But that sense of comfort vanished the moment she saw it. A black pickup truck, parked crookedly in front of the gate. Its headlights were off, but the engine was still warm, faint steam rising from the hood. Laura froze. "That's Ryan's truck," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Chloe turned sharply. "Are you sure?" Yes, he had that same dent on the bumper from backing into a dumpster last winter. Her breath quickened. What is he doing here? Chloe's expression hardened. Stay here. What? No, Laura, Chloe said firmly, the tone that left no room for argument. If he's here, something's wrong. Let me handle it. You stay where it's safe. Laura wanted to protest, but her knees had gone weak. The fog wrapped around her like cold cloth, and the soft light spilling from her mother's kitchen window felt suddenly fragile, like something that could shatter at any second. Chloe crouched low and moved silently along the side of the yard, her boots sinking into the damp grass. The back porch light flickered in the mist. She reached the side of the house and peeked through the kitchen window, careful not to breathe too loudly. Inside, Agnes Dawson sat at the table, a mug of tea in her trembling hands. Across from her was Ryan Holt, neatly dressed, smiling in that careful, practiced way that had once fooled everyone. But there was something colder in his eyes now, something that made Chloe's stomach twist. I just wanted to come by and get to know you better, Ryan said smoothly, his voice too polite to be sincere. After all, once Laura and I are married, you'll be family. Agnes watched him carefully. Strange way to introduce yourself, showing up uninvited. Ryan chuckled. You don't strike me as the kind of woman who stands on formalities. I stand on respect, she replied. The smile on his face faltered for a moment before returning, sharper this time. Then let's respect each other's positions. You want what's best for your daughter, don't you? Agnes said nothing, only took another slow sip of tea. Ryan leaned forward, lowering his voice. You're not in great health, Mrs. Dawson. I can see that. Wouldn't it be nice to know she's secure? Taken care of? I can offer her that. But I need your blessing. If she starts doubting things now, he trailed off, his tone softening into something almost pitying. Well, accidents happen. Roads get icy. People make mistakes. Chloe felt her hands clench into fists. Agnes set her mug down with deliberate calm. Are you threatening me, Mr. Holt? Ryan's smile widened, but his eyes hardened. Of course not. I'm just saying the world's unpredictable, and if she ever decided not to marry me, well, I'd hate for something unfortunate to happen to either of you. Chloe's pulse pounded in her ears. She pulled her phone from her pocket, setting it to record. Agnes's voice didn't waver. You listen to me. Young man, you may scare other people with that kind of talk, but I've lived long enough to know the difference between power and cowardice. And you, Ryan Holt, are nothing but a frightened man trying to look dangerous. Ryan's expression twisted for the first time, his mask cracking. You shouldn't have said that, he hissed. Before Chloe could react, he slammed his palm against the table, tea spilling across the wood. Agnes didn't flinch. She simply stared back, steel in her eyes. That was when Chloe stepped back from the window and whispered, almost to herself, That's enough! She ran toward the front yard, motioning for Laura to stay hidden behind the fence. He's inside, Chloe said breathless. He's threatening her. Laura's face drained of color. We have to do something. We will, Chloe said, pulling out her phone again. I've got everything on tape. But if he lays a hand on her before the police get here, the front door creaked open then, breaking the moment. Ryan's voice carried faintly through the fog, too calm for the words it held. You really should have stayed out of this, Mrs. Dawson. Laura didn't wait another second. Fear surged into something fierce and unstoppable. She broke from the shadows, sprinting toward the porch as Chloe followed right behind, both of them unaware that in the next few minutes, everything would erupt, and nothing in Laura's life would ever be the same again. Inside the kitchen, the air had gone still, the way it does before a storm. Agnes Dawson sat straight in her chair, her thin fingers resting calmly on the table despite the boiling tension before her. Ryan's knuckles were white against the surface, his breathing heavy. "I said," Agnes repeated, her voice steady and sharp as glass, "I don't sell my daughter." Ryan's jaw clenched. His smile vanished entirely. "You think this is a negotiation?" "This is me asking you to leave," she replied, "before you say something you can't take back." Ryan's eyes darkened. That same arrogance she'd heard in his voice now turning into rage. "You old woman," he hissed. "You think you can stand between me and Laura? After everything I've done for her." "You've done nothing but lie," Agnes said quietly. "And now you've made a mistake. You showed me exactly who you are." Her calm seemed to ignite something in him. Ryan slammed his hands against the table so hard the cups rattled. "You don't know what you're talking about. I made her who she is. Without me, she'd still be a nobody from this dump of a town." Agnes rose slowly from her chair, meeting his fury with unflinching composure. "You've mistaken control for love, Mr. Holt. And you've mistaken fear for power. I've seen your kind before." That was when he snapped. He lunged forward, gripping her wrist so tightly she gasped, her tea mug crashing to the floor. "Don't you ever talk to me like that!" he shouted, his face twisted, his voice breaking through the quiet house like thunder. Outside, Chloe heard it first, the sound of shattering ceramic and raised voices. "Oh, God," she whispered. Then came Agnes's voice, trembling but defiant. "Let go of me!" Laura didn't think, she just ran. She burst through the front door, Chloe right behind her. "Ryan!" she screamed. He turned, startled, his hand still gripping her mother's wrist. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, guilt or fear, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "Laura, this isn't what it looks like," he said through clenched teeth. "Let her go." Chloe had already pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she hit 911. "Domestic assault. 142, Elmwood Drive, Maplewood," she said quickly. "He's violent. Send someone fast." Agnes stumbled back as Ryan released her, his expression wild now, cornered. "You shouldn't have come here," he growled at Laura. "You shouldn't have brought her." Laura stood her ground, even though her heart was hammering in her chest. "You need to leave before this gets worse," she said, her voice trembling but loud enough to cut through the air. Before Ryan could respond, the front door banged open again. It was Evan Brooks. He'd heard the shouting from his workshop next door, recognized Laura's voice, and sprinted across the yard. He stopped just long enough to take in the scene. Agnes pale and shaking, Laura between her and Ryan, Chloe clutching her phone. "Step away from them," Evan said firmly. Ryan turned, his face red, his fists still trembling. "Stay out of this." "Not a chance." Evan's voice was calm, but his stance was solid, shoulders squared, body angled, slightly forward. When Ryan took a step toward Laura, Evan moved faster, grabbing his arm and forcing him back, not violently but with steady, trained control. "You're done," he said. "You touch her again and you'll answer for it." Ryan tried to struggle, but Evan kept him in a safe hold, using his weight to pin him against the counter. "Let me go." Ryan yelled, but Evan's voice stayed even. "The police are on their way. Don't make this harder." Chloe, still on the phone, gave dispatch a quick update. "He's restrained. No weapons, no injuries yet. Officers can come straight through the front." Laura stood frozen, watching the man she had once thought she loved reduced to this, a stranger thrashing and shouting, exposed in every ugly way. Within minutes, red and blue lights washed through the windows, their reflection flashing across the kitchen walls. The distant sound of sirens cut through the fog. Evan stepped back as two officers entered, immediately taking control. Ryan shouted something incoherent as they cuffed him, but no one was listening anymore. Agnes sank back into her chair, trembling, while Laura knelt beside her, gripping her mother's hands. "It's over," Laura whispered, her voice cracking. "It's over, Mom." Agnes exhaled shakily, squeezing her daughter's fingers. "You came just in time," she murmured. Behind them, Chloe ended the call with the dispatcher, her hands still trembling. Evan stood near the door, breathing heavily, watching the patrol car pull away into the fog. Outside, the mist swallowed the sound of the sirens as the quiet returned to Maplewood. But inside that little wooden house, everything had changed. Ryan was gone. The danger had passed. And for the first time in years, Laura Dawson felt what peace really sounded like. It was the sound of silence after chaos, the sound of her mother's heartbeat slowly returning to calm, and the quiet voice inside her whispering, "You're safe now." The flashing lights painted the wet road in red and blue as the patrol cars rolled to a stop outside the Dawson house. The sound of gravel crunching under heavy boots filled the night air. A young officer stepped onto the porch first, flashlight cutting through the fog. "Maplewood PD. Everyone inside okay?" Laura nodded shakily from the doorway. "He's in there, Ryan Holt. He tried to hurt my mother." Her voice cracked, but the words carried enough weight to make the officer's expression harden instantly. Two deputies entered the kitchen, where Ryan sat slumped against the counter, face pale and defiant. Evan stood nearby, his arms folded, watching closely but not speaking. The officers spoke to Ryan in calm, clipped tones before handcuffing him. One of them recited his rights as the other collected his wallet and keys. When they led him past Laura, Ryan's eyes locked on hers. For a second, the smug arrogance returned, the same look he'd given her so many times before, that quiet, poisonous certainty that he still held control. But this time it didn't work. Laura didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She only turned slightly toward Chloe, who held up her phone like a lifeline. "I have the recording," Chloe told the officers firmly. "Everything he said, every threat is on here. He also has a pending fraud investigation with the state. I've got that documentation too." The older officer took the phone carefully, nodding. "We'll need to log it as evidence." "Thank you, ma'am." Ryan's smirk faltered. "You think anyone's going to believe this circus act?" he sneered. "She set me up. All of you did." Evan stepped forward, his tone steady but sharp. "You set yourself up, Holt." The deputies guided Ryan toward the door as he muttered curses under his breath. The engine of the cruiser rumbled to life outside, and when the door closed behind them, the house seemed to exhale. Only then did Laura realize she was shaking. Her knees buckled, and she gripped the edge of the table for balance. Evan was beside her in an instant. "Easy," he said gently. "He's gone now." Across the room, Agnes sat in her chair, pale and exhausted. An EMT knelt beside her, wrapping a cold pack around her wrist. "No fractures," he assured softly. "Just a bruise. She'll be fine, but she needs rest." Laura knelt beside her mother, tears filling her eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have come sooner. I should have known." Agnes reached out with her uninjured hand, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "You couldn't have known, sweetheart. People like him hide who they are until they can't anymore." Laura's throat tightened. She'd buried her face against her mother's shoulder, letting the tears come. For the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't try to hold them back. Chloe came over quietly, setting a reassuring hand on her back. "You did everything right." "Laura," she said softly, "you're safe. She's safe. That's all that matters now." Evan lingered near the door, watching the scene quietly. When Laura finally looked up, her eyes red but steady, he said the words she didn't know she needed to hear. "You got out, Laura," he said, his voice low and even. "You don't need to run anymore. Let the truth heal what he tried to break." Laura looked at him, the weight of it sinking in slowly. Truth, not revenge, not rage, was what would set her free. Outside, the sirens faded into the distance, replaced by the soft rhythm of rain beginning again. The house smelled faintly of chamomile tea and cedar, grounding her back in the moment. Chloe exhaled, tension finally draining from her shoulders. "I'll send the video to the police station and your lawyer," she said, almost matter of fact. "He won't get away with this, not this time." Laura nodded, standing beside her mother. Her hand still trembled, but her voice was steady. "No, he won't." And for the first time since everything began, she believed it. The law would take care of Ryan Holt. The past would take care of itself. And all that remained now, for her mother, for the quiet little house in Maplewood, was the slow, steady work of healing. The rain had softened to a steady whisper against the windows, a sound that filled the house like a lullaby. Agnes insisted on making tea, though her wrist was still tender. "Chamomile," she said, moving carefully between the counter and the stove. "It helps quiet the heart after a storm." Chloe sat on the couch, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, exhaustion written across her face. Evan and Laura helped set the table. 3 cups, a small plate of cookies from a tin that looked as old as the house itself. When the kettle began to whistle, Agnes poured the tea and sat down with a sigh. Her eyes warm despite the bruising along her wrist. For the first time in what felt like years, there was peace. No sirens, no shouting, just the low hum of rain, the faint crackle from the old wood stove, and the steady rhythm of breath returning to normal. Laura glanced across the table at Evan, who sat quietly, his hands wrapped around his cup. The firelight carved soft shadows along his jaw, highlighting the gentleness in his expression. It was the same calm strength she remembered from when they were teenagers, the kind that never needed to prove itself. Agnes looked between them, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "It's strange," she said softly, "seeing you two sitting here again. Feels like no time has passed at all." Laura returned the smile, though her eyes were still rimmed red. "Feels like a lifetime." Evan looked down into his tea. "Maybe it needed to be," he said. There was a pause, long and quiet, broken only by the rain. Then he lifted his gaze to hers, the weight of old memories in his eyes. "Laura," he began, voice low, almost uncertain. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said a long time ago." She straightened, heart tightening. "Evan, that day," he continued, his tone firm now. "The day you saw me with Amanda. It wasn't what you thought." The name hit her like a forgotten note. Amanda, her friend. The one she'd found in his arms behind the school gym, laughing as if the world had vanished. That moment had carved a scar so deep it had shaped everything after. Evan took a slow breath. She drugged my drink, said it was lemonade. I woke up with her leaning against me, pretending we'd been together. She told you before I could even speak. And by the time I found you, you were already gone. Laura's throat went dry. "You're saying she lied?" "She admitted it a year later," he said. "Came by my shop crying, saying she did it because she was jealous. I never told anyone. I figured it wouldn't change anything. You'd built a new life. And I didn't want to dig up the past." Agnes watched them quietly, her eyes glistening with understanding. "And now," she said gently, "the past has finally found its way home." Laura sat still for a long moment, trying to steady the storm inside her. Anger, grief, disbelief, they all rushed together and then, slowly, dissolved into something softer. "I hated you for years," she whispered. "I blamed you for everything that went wrong after, for making me afraid to trust." Evan nodded. "I know, and I blamed myself for not stopping you, for not fighting harder to make you stay." Her tears came quietly this time, not from heartbreak, but from release. They fell onto her hands as she let out a long, shaking breath. "I'm sorry," she said, "for leaving without listening, for carrying the wrong story in my heart." Evan reached across the table, hesitating for just a moment before taking her hand. "We were kids," he said softly. "We both needed to grow up before we could see the truth." Agnes smiled faintly, raising her cup. To second chances, she said. Laura looked up at her mother, then at Evan. The candlelight flickered in their eyes, reflected in the warm gold of the tea. She raised her cup too. To second chances, she echoed. Outside, the rain fell steady and soft, washing away the night's chaos, carrying with it the last remnants of fear. The house glowed with quiet warmth, the kind that only comes after forgiveness. And for the first time in years, Laura Dawson felt whole again. The morning after the storm arrived in silence, as if the world itself was exhaling. A pale sun broke through the thinning clouds, casting soft gold over the wet fields that stretched behind the Dawson house. The rain had washed everything clean. The porch glistened, the grass shimmered with dew, and the air smelled of cedar and earth. That unmistakable scent of Oregon after a long night of rain. Laura stepped outside barefoot, her shoes dangling from one hand. The wooden boards of the back porch were cool beneath her feet. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt weightless. The air was crisp, filled with the low hum of life returning to rhythm. The drip of water from the eaves, the chirp of a distant robin, the whisper of wind through the tall pines. She followed the narrow stone path that led to the back garden. Her father had built it decades ago, laying each piece of stone with patient hands. The roses had long gone wild, curling toward the fence, and the old apple tree still stood proudly at the center, its branches heavy with morning droplets that sparkled like glass beads. Laura closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The smell of wet bark, fresh moss, and faint wood smoke from a nearby chimney filled her chest. It felt like being home again, not the house, not the town, but herself. From the porch, she could hear laughter, light, familiar, and comforting. Her mother and Chloe were sitting together, bundled in sweaters, their mugs steaming. Agnes's face was brighter than it had been in months, her laughter easy and free. Chloe was talking animatedly, using her hands the way she always did when telling a story. And there, near the edge of the yard, stood Evan Brooks. The axe rose and fell in smooth, steady rhythm as he split logs for the stove. The sound of wood cracking against the block echoed softly across the garden. His sleeves were rolled up, sunlight catching the fine mist that hung in the air around him. When he noticed her watching, he smiled, quiet, genuine, the kind of smile that didn't demand anything in return. Laura smiled back. It wasn't the rush of old love or the confusion of nostalgia. It was something calmer, deeper, a recognition that after all the storms and scars, there were still places in the heart that could feel peace. She joined her mother and Chloe on the porch. "You're up early," Agnes said, handing her a mug of tea. "I couldn't sleep," Laura said softly, sitting down beside her. "It's too beautiful to waste." Chloe grinned. "You sound like a Hallmark card." "Maybe I finally earned one," Laura replied with a laugh. They sat together for a while, watching the mist lift from the valley, revealing the outlines of the hills and the faint shimmer of the river beyond. The world looked untouched again, as if nothing terrible had ever crossed its quiet borders. After a moment, Laura turned to her mother. "I think I'm going to stay," she said simply. Agnes blinked, then smiled knowingly. "You mean it?" Laura nodded. "I called Principal Harris this morning. There's still an opening at the elementary school." Her mother reached over, squeezing her hand. "Then you've just made this old woman very happy." Chloe raised her mug. "To new beginnings," she said. Laura looked toward Evan again, the morning sun glinting off the axe blade as he worked. "To peace," she said quietly. They clinked their cups together, the sound soft and sure. Beyond the porch, the garden shimmered in the light, the apple tree swaying gently, the earth breathing beneath their feet, and the air filled with that fragile, perfect stillness that only follows survival. For Laura Dawson, Maplewood was no longer the town she had left behind. It was the place where everything lost had quietly found its way home again. A year later, Maplewood had slipped into autumn. The air carried that familiar crispness that made every breath taste like apples and pine. The hills surrounding the town were brushed in copper and gold, and the old Dawson garden glowed under the amber light of early evening. Lanterns hung from the apple tree branches, swaying gently in the breeze. The smell of cinnamon cider drifted through the air, mingling with the faint hum of laughter and music. It was the perfect kind of wedding, quiet, sincere, and entirely their own. Laura stood near the porch, her ivory dress simple and soft, the hem brushing the damp grass. The lace sleeves caught the warm light as she adjusted the small bouquet in her hands. Wildflowers, picked from the hill behind the house that morning. Chloe had tied them together with a pale blue ribbon and slipped a tiny silver pendant into the knot. "A little truth," she had whispered earlier, fastening the matching necklace around Laura's neck. The pendant was small, engraved with a single word, truth. Now, as guests gathered in the yard, just a handful of neighbors, friends, and family, Laura caught sight of Chloe near the apple tree, arranging candles on the tables. Her hair was pinned up, a few strands falling loose in the soft wind. When she looked up and saw Laura watching, she smiled and mouthed, "You made it." Agnes sat in her favorite chair near the porch, wrapped in a shawl the color of smoke. Her wrist had long healed, though she still tapped it now and then, as if to remind herself that even scars can fade. She looked radiant in the golden light, her eyes soft with the kind of joy that doesn't demand words. And then there was Evan. He stood at the far end of the garden, speaking quietly with the minister. The evening sun caught in his hair, now a shade lighter from the summer. His suit was plain but neat, and in his boutonniere rested one small rose, the same kind Laura's father had once planted by the fence. When their eyes met, he smiled that same quiet, steady smile that had anchored her through the chaos of the last year. As the ceremony began, the chatter hushed into a peaceful silence. The only sounds were the wind moving through the trees and the faint hum of crickets waking in the grass. Evan reached for her hands, his touch warm and grounding. "You sure about this?" he teased softly, the same humor she remembered from when they were 17. Laura smiled. "Ask me again in another 17 years. The guests laughed gently. Even Agnes chuckled, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. When the minister spoke, the words were simple. No grand vows, no rehearsed speeches, just two people standing beneath the apple tree that had weathered every season, promising to keep walking through whatever came next. "I thought love had to be perfect," Laura said softly when it was her turn. "But it doesn't. It just has to be true." Evan's eyes glistened. "And it took us a while to get here," he said. "But I'd go through every wrong turn again if it led me back to this." Look outside, smiling through tears. When they kissed, the garden erupted with applause, gentle, joyful, full of the warmth only small towns know how to give. Afterward, as dusk deepened into night, the yard came alive under the golden glow of string lights. Chloe played music from a small speaker, and neighbors danced barefoot on the grass. Children chased each other with sparklers, their laughter rising into the crisp air. Agnes clinked her cup of cider against Chloe's glass and said with a grin, "I always knew she'd find her way back here." Chloe looked toward the newlyweds, swaying under the apple tree. "I think Maplewood just got its happy ending," she said. Later, when the guests had begun to leave and the stars emerged one by one, Laura wandered a few steps away from the porch. The yard was quiet now, the lanterns flickering softly in the breeze. She could still hear music faintly behind her, Evan's voice mingling with her mother's laughter. She tilted her head toward the night sky, the chill of autumn brushing against her skin, and whispered to herself, "Sometimes the worst surprises save our lives." It wasn't bitterness anymore, it was gratitude. Every heartbreak, every detour, every sleepless night had led her here, to this small circle of light and love. Behind her, Evan called out softly, "Hey, Mrs. Brooks, come dance with me." Laura turned, smiling, her heart light. She walked back across the grass, her dress brushing against the dew, and let him pull her into his arms. They swayed, slowly under the tree, the lanterns glowing above like suspended stars. And as the last notes of music drifted into the night, Maplewood seemed to hold its breath for a moment, content, whole, and timeless. The storms had passed, the truth had spoken, and love in its quiet, imperfect way had finally come full circle.